The night of January 6, 1537, in a dimly lit chamber of the Medici villa at Via del Proconsolo in Florence, Duke Alessandro de Medici waited alone. His cousin Lorenzino had lured him there with whispered promises, an intimate encounter with a beautiful widow. He said, his smile sly and knowing. Alessandro, the first Duke of Florence, stripped to his shirt and paced the room in anticipation. His heavy gold chain caught the candlelight. The air hung thick with perfume and the faint trace of wine. Then the door opened. It wasn't a woman who entered. Lorenzino rushed in, his servant Scorancolo beside him, steel glinting in their hands. Alessandro fought back ferociously, desperately. In the chaos, he bit down on Lorenzino's finger, tearing through bone and flesh. But the blades found their marks. His throat, his chest, the place where his heart once beat. He fell. The room went silent. The Duke, who had ruled with iron and indulgence, was gone at 26, betrayed by his own blood. That single act of betrayal didn't just end a life. It cracked open the Medici Dynasty, exposed the rot beneath the gold. The family that had risen from peasant bankers to popes, queens, and grand dukes carried a shadow, one that grew darker with every generation. A shadow born of ambitions so fierce it consumed its own. If this story of hidden curses and broken legacies grips you, hit that like button and drop a comment. Tell me which Medici tragedy chills you the most. Subscribe if you want more dives into the dark side of old money dynasties. Now let's go back to where the poison first took root. The Medici began in the muddy fields of Cafaggio, 20 kilometers north of Florence, simple folk who took their name from a distant ancestor who practiced folk medicine. By the late 1300s, they'd moved into the city, trading herbs for coins, coins for loans. Giovanni de Medici de Medici turned those loans into an empire. He built the Medici Bank into Europe's most powerful financial machine, financing wars, popes, and kings, without ever wearing a crown. Giovanni's genius wasn't just in lending money. It was in understanding leverage. He established the bank's headquarters in Florence in 1397, but the real power came from the branches. By 1402, he'd opened operations in Rome, positioning himself as the Vatican's preferred banker. When Pope John XXII, I needed funds to fight rival claimants to the papacy, Giovanni was there. The interest rates were discreet, the gratitude immense. The Medici Bank didn't just lend. It created a web. Letters of credit replaced the need to transport gold across bandit-infested roads. Merchants in London could draw on Medici accounts in Bruges. Wool traders in Florence could settle debts in Geneva without a single coin changing hands. The family took a small percentage of every transaction, a golden thread connecting every major European economy. By the time Giovanni died in 1429, the bank controlled approximately 10% of all papal revenues. His personal fortune was estimated at 180 florins, the equivalent of $30 million today, but with purchasing power closer to $500 million when you account for what that wealth could command. His son Cosimo inherited the machine in 1429, and he refined it into something ruthless yet brilliant. Cosimo was no mere banker. He walked the narrow streets of Florence in plain wool, yet his ledgers controlled the fate of nations. He loaned to the Vatican, then used that leverage to place allies in the Signoria, the city's ruling council. In 1433, rivals who feared his shadow had him exiled. But a year later, he returned stronger. His enemies scattered or silenced. He never declared himself ruler. He didn't need to. The Republic bent to his will. Cosimo understood something his rivals didn't. Immortality wasn't found in titles. It was found in stone and paint, in the manuscripts that would outlive empires. He became the patron of Donatello, financing the sculptor's workshop on Via del Proconsolo. When Donatello completed his bronze David, that startling nude boy with one foot resting on Goliath's severed head, Cosimo placed it in the courtyard of his new palace, visible to select visitors. A statement. A challenge. He rescued Marsilio Ficino's father from poverty, then educated young Marsilio himself, transforming him into Europe's leading translator of Plato. Cosimo gave Ficino a villa at Careggi and a life pension. In return, Ficino recreated the Platonic Academy, drawing philosophers, poets, and scholars into the Medici orbit. The books mattered as much as the buildings. Cosimo employed 45 scribes who worked in shifts copying manuscripts. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, Cosimo sent agents to buy up Greek texts fleeing east. He acquired works by Plato, Aristotle, Ptolemy, knowledge that had been lost to Western Europe for centuries. His library at San Marco contained over 400 volumes by his death in 1464, the finest private collection in Europe. Each manuscript was bound in leather, stamped with the Medici pal, those 6 balls that marked everything the family touched. Under Cosimo, the Palazzo Medici Riccardi rose on Via Larga Fortress, like its rusticated stone walls hiding inner courtyards, where Donatello's bronze David stood nude and defiant, the first freestanding nude since antiquity. Velvet curtains muffled the sounds of the city. Candlelight flickered on frescoes by Gozzoli depicting the family's journey to power as a biblical procession. Between 1434 and 1470, Cosimo spent the equivalent of $500 million modern dollars on art and scholarship alone. His grandson Lorenzo would later calculate that figure in quiet amazement. Branches of the bank stretched across Europe, Bruges, Lyon, Geneva, London, financing textile trades, alum mines for dyes, even the Wars of the Roses. Then came Lorenzo the Magnificent in 1469. At 20, he was already a poet, a diplomat, a hunter of ancient manuscripts. He patronized Botticelli's Birth of Venus, Michelangelo's earliest sculptures, Leonardo's apprenticeship. The Palazzo Medici became a salon where Platonic philosophers debated under his roof. Lorenzo lived in 2 worlds simultaneously. In public, he was the philosopher prince, hosting poets in his garden, debating Platonic love at dinner tables where the wine flowed and the conversation sparkled. He wrote sonnets comparing his beloved Lucrezia Donati to classical goddesses. His poetry was good, genuinely good, earning respect from the literary circles of Italy. In private, he was calculating, almost cold. When the Pazzi Bank challenged Medici dominance, Lorenzo used his Vatican connections to strip them of their position as papal bankers. When Pope Sixtus IV resisted Lorenzo, withheld loans until the pontiff reconsidered. The Pazzi family seethed. Francesco de Pazzi, young and ambitious, began plotting. The Pazzi Conspiracy wasn't spontaneous rage. It was methodical. Francesco traveled to Rome, securing the Pope's tacit approval. Sixtus wanted Lorenzo humbled, though he likely didn't expect murder. The conspirators recruited the Archbishop of Pisa, Francesco Salviati, who wanted the Archbishop of Florence's position. They even convinced a local priest to participate despite his initial horror at the idea of murder in a cathedral. The plan was elegant: strike during Easter Mass on April 26, 1478, when both Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano would be unarmed and vulnerable. The signal would be the elevation of the host, the most sacred moment of the Mass. Yet Lorenzo's ambition sharpened the edges. When the Pazzi family, backed by Pope Sixtus IV, struck during Easter Mass in the Duomo, Giuliano fell under 19 blade strikes. Lorenzo escaped with a neck wound, his ally Francesco Nori taking the final blow meant for him. Lorenzo's revenge was swift and merciless. Within hours, Florence became a slaughterhouse. The Pazzi were hunted down systematically. Francesco de Pazzi was found hiding in his uncle Jacopo's house. dragged naked through the streets, and hanged from a window of the Palazzo della Signoria. His body swung beside Archbishop Salviati, who'd been hanged in his ecclesiastical robes, an act so shocking it triggered Pope Sixtus IV to excommunicate the entire city of Florence. Jacopo de Pazzi tried to flee on horseback, but was caught by peasants who recognized him. They brought him back to Florence, where he was tortured, hanged, cut down, dragged through the streets by children, then thrown into the Arno. When his body washed ashore downstream, it was dug up, dragged back to the city, used as a door knocker at the Pazzi Palace, then finally thrown back into the river. Botticelli was commissioned to paint portraits of the hanged conspirators on the walls of the Bargello prison frescoes, showing them dangling their faces twisted as a permanent warning. The paintings stayed there for decades. Lorenzo emerged from the crisis with unshakable power, but the cost was subtle and growing. The bank had been neglected during his cultural pursuits. Branches in Bruges and London were overextended. By the 1480s, the London branch failed entirely, costing the family over 50 florins. Power looked invincible, but the golden hour always fades. The curse wasn't a spell cast by some vengeful witch. It was ambition itself metastasizing through bloodlines. The Medici married into royalty. Catherine de Medici to Henry I of France in 1533. Marie de Medici to Henry IV in 16. Yet each alliance carried poison. Catherine, orphaned young and widowed at 40, became regent for her sons. She navigated France's religious wars with calculated ruthlessness. Catherine arrived in France as damaged goods, an Italian merchant's daughter marrying a king's son. The French court mocked her accent, her lack of dowry after Pope Clement V. II died before paying it her inability to produce an heir for the first 10 years of marriage. She learned to survive by watching, listening, waiting. When her husband Henry I died in 1559, killed in a jousting accident when a lance splinter pierced his eye and entered his brain, Catherine was thrust into power as regent for her 15-year-old son, Francis II. Francis died within a year. Her second son, Charles IX, was 10 when he took the throne. Catherine ruled France for him, and then for her third son, Henry III, after Charles died at 23. 3 sons, 3 kings, all of them weak, sickly, or unstable. Catherine's reputation darkened with each political maneuver. She was accused of poisoning rivals, likely untrue, but the rumor stuck because of her Italian heritage and the famous perfume gloves she gifted to enemies who later fell ill. The French whispered she consulted astrologers, that she kept a mirror chamber where she could see the future, that she practiced the dark arts, learned from her Florentine upbringing. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. She was willing to do whatever it took to keep her sons on the throne. Then came August 23, 24, 1572. After her daughter Margaret's wedding to Protestant Henry of Navarre, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre erupted. Admiral Coligny, wounded days earlier in an attempt on his life, one many blamed on Catherine, met his end in his own bed. What followed was chaos. Thousands of Huguenots fell across Paris, men, women, children, their bodies cast into the Seine, until witnesses said the river darkened. Estimates range from 3-0 in Paris to 70-0 across France over the following weeks. Catherine's role remains debated by historians, but the stain stuck. She became the Black Queen, whispered to practice the dark arts. Back in Tuscany, the shadows deepened. Alessandro's end in 1537 handed power to Cosimo I from a junior branch. He solidified the dukedom, but the pattern repeated betrayals, sudden departures from life. Francesco I and his wife Bianca Capello both passed in 1587 under suspicious circumstances. Many believed his brother Ferdinando orchestrated their exit to claim power. The official story was malaria, but both died within hours of each other after dining at Ferdinando's villa. The coincidence was too perfect. What the Medici couldn't understand in the 16th and 17th centuries was that they were destroying themselves biologically. Intermarriage within elite circles had always been common, but the Medici took it to extremes. They married cousins to cousins, nieces to uncles, always seeking to keep the bloodline pure and the fortune consolidated. Each generation, the gene pool narrowed. Hemophilia appeared. Gout became hereditary. Infertility rates climbed. By the 17th century, the curse turned inward. Cosimo I, who ruled from 1670 to 1723, embodied the decay. His marriage to Marguerite Louise d'Orléans was arranged in 1661 at the Louvre. She arrived demanding crown jewels. He refused. She feared for her safety, hired French cooks, blamed him when illness struck her. They produced 3 children. Then, in 1675, she abandoned him for the convent of Montmartre, stripping villas bare as she left. Cosimo monitored her from afar, scandalized by rumors of affairs with grooms. Cosimo I's response to personal failure was to tighten his grip on everything he could control. He imposed increasingly draconian moral laws. Unmarried couples caught together faced fines or public shaming. Prostitutes were rounded up and forced into Magdalene convents. Jewish communities which had thrived in Tuscany under earlier Medici rulers suddenly found themselves restricted to ghettos, forbidden from owning property outside designated areas, required to wear yellow badges. The economic policies were equally disastrous. Cosimo raised taxes repeatedly to fund his religious obsessions. He built churches, funded monasteries, commissioned endless masses for his soul. Trade declined as merchants fled to Venice or Genoa. The Tuscan fleet, once a proud maritime force, rotted in harbor. By 17, Florence's population had dropped from 76,000 to 59,000. His court became a theater of the absurd. Courtiers whispered that the Grand Duke spent hours in private prayer, that he wore a hair shirt under his robes, that he flagellated himself for impure thoughts. Yet he also maintained a small harem of mistresses in a villa outside the city. Religious mania and hypocrisy intertwined. He retreated into fanaticism. He banned premarital intimacy, regulated vice, outlawed relationships between Jewish and Christian communities. Executions increased to 6 per day. Anti-Semitism peaked. He fined Christians working for Jews, banned Jewish wet nurses from Christian homes. The treasury emptied. In rural markets, barter replaced coin. His sons failed to produce heirs. Ferdinando passed in 1713, his body weakened by disease, childless. The final blow came with Gian Gaston, last Grand Duke. Married in 1697 to Anna Maria Franziska of Saxe-Lauenburg, he despised her from the start. She raged, talked to horses. He fled to Prague, drowning in gambling debts of 150 crowns, pawning jewels one by one. Alcohol consumed him. He surrounded himself with the Rospanti poor youths, procured by his favorite Giuliano Dami, for bedchamber entertainments. By 1729, a sprained ankle confined him to bed. For 8 years, his room became unbearable. He vomited at banquets, wiped his mouth with his wig, told jokes so crude they cleared rooms within minutes. Surprisingly, he reformed taxes, abolished executions. Yet the dynasty was already finished. July 9, 1737. Gian Gaston lay in Palazzo Pitti, his bed unchanged for days. Anna Maria Luisa urged repentance. He stared blankly into nothing. No male heir, no continuation. The line that had bankrolled empires, crowned popes, ruled France through queens, extinguished by infertility excess and the slow rot of unchecked ambition. Tuscany passed to Francis Stephen of Lorraine. Spanish troops had occupied Florence in 1731. Austrians replaced them in 1737. Anna Maria Luisa signed the Patto di Famiglia, willing all Medici art to the state. Nothing would leave Florence. The Uffizi preserved their collection. The palaces stood empty of their blood. Today, the Palazzo Medici Riccardi still looms on Via Cavour, its courtyard echoing with tourists' footsteps. The Pitti Palace houses galleries where Botticelli's Venus gazes eternally young. Cadet branches linger princes of Ottajano in the South Counts in Verona, but the main line vanished. Descendants through Marie de Medici reached Louis XV of France, even the Bourbons of Spain, yet the core line ended in silence in 1737. The Medici paradox haunts every gallery where their legacy lives. They funded the Renaissance, literally funded it. Without Medici gold, Michelangelo might have remained a stonecutter. Botticelli might have painted shop signs. Leonardo might have stayed an apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop, never touching the walls of the Sistine Chapel or imagining flying machines. The Uffizi Gallery, the Pitti Palace, the Laurentian Library monuments to human achievement, all Medici creations. The family spent an estimated 663 million florins on art and architecture between 1434 and 1737. In modern terms, close to $500 billion in purchasing power. Yet they couldn't save themselves. The same ruthlessness that crushed the Pazzi Conspiracy destroyed their own bloodline. The same obsession with legacy that built eternal monuments created a family so isolated, so intermarried, so consumed by its own mythology that it literally bred itself out of existence. The Medici bought immortality with art, but they paid with their own destruction. Power that once bent popes now bends only to the grave. Was it worth it? The question hangs in the galleries unanswered as the candles flicker on.